The mountain air bit through my Kevlar like frozen needles, each breath forming crystalline clouds that vanished into the Afghan darkness. Staff Sergeant Paul here, and I'm telling you this story because someone needs to know what we found in those caves, what we woke up. The briefing room at Forward Operating Base Chapman stank of stale coffee and diesel fumes when Colonel Harrison dropped the folder on our table. 6 of us sat around that metal table, my recon team, the best the 82nd Airborne had to offer. But nothing could have prepared us for what was waiting in those mountains. "Gentlemen," Harrison began, his weathered face grim under the fluorescent lights, "we've got a situation in the Nuristan province. Local shepherds report entire herds of goats vanishing overnight. Not stolen, vanished. No blood, no tracks, no bodies." Corporal Will, our comms specialist, leaned forward. "Sir, with respect, missing livestock doesn't usually require a full recon team." Harrison's jaw tightened. "The livestock isn't the problem, Morrison. It's the lights." He clicked open his laptop, and satellite imagery filled the screen. The Nuristan mountains stretched endlessly. But there, deep in a valley that shouldn't exist on any map, pulsed an ethereal blue glow. Thermal imaging shows the light sources coming from underground, a cave system that, according to geological surveys, shouldn't exist. Harrison's voice dropped. "And there's something else. 3 nights ago, we intercepted Taliban radio chatter. They're calling it the breath of Iblis, the devil's breath. They've abandoned the entire region. When the Taliban runs scared, you know you're dealing with something beyond bullets and bombs." Private Chase, barely 19 and fresh from Denver, shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, what exactly are we looking for down there?" "Answers, Private. Intelligence suggests it might be a weapons cache, possibly chemical. Your job is to investigate, document, and report back. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary." But as I studied those satellite images, something cold settled in my stomach. The cave entrance was perfectly circular, too uniform to be natural, and those symbols carved into the surrounding rock face, they looked older than the mountains themselves. 4 hours later, we were on a Black Hawk, slicing through the pre-dawn darkness toward our insertion point. The aircraft's rotors beat a steady rhythm against the thin mountain air, but underneath that mechanical pulse, I swear I could feel something else, a deeper thrumming, like the heartbeat of the mountain itself. Sergeant First Class Mick, our demolitions expert, checked his equipment for the 3rd time. "Paul," he shouted over the rotors using my call sign. "You ever seen anything like those cave markings before?" I had, actually. In Iraq, we'd uncovered some pre-Islamic sites, but nothing like this. Those symbols weren't Arabic, weren't any language I recognized. They seemed to shift and writhe when you looked at them directly, like they were carved from living shadow. "Stay focused, Mick," I replied, using his nickname. "We go in, we assess, we report back. Simple as that." But nothing about this felt simple. The helicopter set us down on a rocky outcrop 2 clicks from the cave entrance. As the Black Hawk disappeared into the morning mist, an oppressive silence settled over the mountains. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Private First Class Kim, our medic, was already checking his medical kit. "Anyone else notice how quiet it is? No birds, no insects, nothing." He was right. The usual sounds of mountain wildlife were completely absent. It was as if every living thing had fled from this place. We formed up in standard patrol formation and began our approach. The terrain was treacherous, loose scree and jagged rocks that could snap an ankle or tear through Kevlar. But it was Specialist Trevis, our marksman, who first spotted the anomaly. "Movement, 2 o'clock, he whispered, raising his rifle scope. We all froze, weapons ready. Through the early morning haze, shapes moved across the valley floor below us. But as we watched, they resolved into something impossible. The missing goats, wandering in perfect circles around the cave entrance. "What the hell?" Will breathed. The animals moved with mechanical precision, their eyes reflecting an unnatural blue light. They weren't grazing or bleeding, just walking in endless, hypnotic loops. When one completed its circuit, it would seamlessly join the back of the procession, like some bizarre ritualistic dance. "Sir," Chase whispered, his voice shaking, "those goats have been missing for weeks. They should be dead. They should have been." But there they were, somehow sustained by whatever was emanating from those caves. As we descended toward the valley, the temperature dropped dramatically. Our breath came in thick clouds, and frost began forming on our equipment despite the Afghan sun beating down from above. The closer we got to the cave entrance, the more the world seemed to bend around us. The cave mouth was exactly as it appeared in the satellite images. A perfect circle carved into the mountainside, approximately 12 feet in diameter. But standing before it, I could see details that no satellite could capture. The symbols weren't just carved into the rock, they were burned into it, as if branded by some unimaginable heat. "Jesus," Kim muttered, approaching the entrance with his flashlight raised. "Look at this!" The symbols seemed to pulse with their own inner light, a faint blue radiance that matched the glow emanating from deep within the cave. But it was the smell that really got to me. A mixture of ozone and something else, something organic and ancient, like the scent of a tomb that had been sealed for millennia. Mick knelt beside the entrance, running his fingers along the perfectly smooth stone. "This wasn't carved by hand, Paul. This was melted. But what kind of heat could do this to solid rock?" I was about to answer when Will's radio crackled to life, but instead of the expected check-in from base, we heard something else. A low, rhythmic humming that seemed to come from the radio itself. "Will, kill that thing," I ordered. He tried, but the radio wouldn't respond. The humming grew louder, more insistent, and I realized it wasn't coming from the radio at all. It was coming from the cave. We stood at the threshold of that perfectly circular entrance, our flashlights cutting through the darkness beyond. The tunnel stretched downward at an impossible angle, the walls lined with more of those burning symbols. And far below, perhaps hundreds of feet down, that blue light pulsed like a massive, sleeping heart. "Sir," Travis said quietly, "I'm getting readings on my thermal scope. There's something down there. Something big." I checked my own equipment. The temperature inside the cave was reading -40 degrees Fahrenheit, which was impossible. And the electromagnetic readings were off the charts, levels that should have fried our electronics. "We need to call this in," Chase said, his voice barely steady. But even as he spoke, I knew we were past the point of no return. Whatever was down there had been waiting for us. Those goats, those lights, the Taliban's sudden retreat, it had all been leading to this moment. I looked at my team, 5 good men who trusted me to bring them home safely. Mick with his steady hands and quiet confidence, Will with his quick wit and technical genius, Kim with his compassionate heart and unshakable dedication, Travis with his sharp eyes and protective instincts, and Chase, barely more than a kid, who'd enlisted to serve his country and found himself standing at the threshold of something beyond human comprehension. We go in, I decided, but we stay together, we stay alert, and at the first sign of trouble, we extract. Clear? They nodded, but I could see the fear in their eyes. Hell, I was scared too. But we were soldiers, and soldiers don't run from the unknown. They face it head on. We entered the cave in single file, our footsteps echoing strangely in the circular tunnel. The walls were impossibly smooth, almost glass-like, and warm to the touch despite the freezing temperature. Our flashlights revealed more symbols, thousands of them, covering every surface in intricate patterns that seemed to tell a story of something vast and terrible that had slumbered beneath these mountains for eons. 20 feet down, the tunnel opened into a vast chamber. Our lights couldn't penetrate the darkness enough to find the ceiling or far walls, but the blue glow emanating from deeper within provided an eerie illumination. And there, scattered across the chamber floor like discarded toys, were the remnants of previous expeditions. Soviet-era equipment dating back to the 1980s, American gear from the early 2000s, and something else. Older artifacts that looked like they belonged in a museum, not in an Afghan cave. "My God," Kim whispered, kneeling beside a skeleton still wearing the tattered remains of a Soviet uniform. "How many people have found this place?" The answer came from the walls themselves. Carved into the stone were names, dates, and messages in dozens of languages. Some were military designations, others appeared to be civilian. But they all shared one thing in common. They all ended abruptly, as if the writers had simply vanished mid-sentence. And at the bottom of the chamber, descending into darkness so complete it seemed to swallow our flashlight beams, was a staircase. Not carved from the mountain, built into it. Each step was perfectly uniform, made from some black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. That's when we heard it, a sound like breathing, but massive, as if the mountain itself was slowly inhaling and exhaling. The blue light pulsed in rhythm with it, and I realized with dawning horror that we weren't exploring a cave system. We were inside something that was alive. The black stone steps descended into absolute darkness, each one perfectly carved and impossibly ancient. As we made our way down, our flashlights revealed walls covered in hieroglyphs that seemed to writhe and shift when observed directly. The breathing sound grew stronger with each step, a rhythmic inhalation and exhalation that vibrated through the stone beneath our boots. "Paul," Will whispered, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. "My equipment is going crazy. The electromagnetic readings are off the charts, and I'm picking up some kind of interference, like something massive is disrupting all frequencies." I checked my own gear. The temperature had dropped to -60 degrees Fahrenheit, yet somehow we weren't freezing. Our breath should have been forming ice crystals, but instead it just hung in the air like spectral fog. 20 steps down, the staircase opened into another chamber, this one even larger than the first. Our flashlights couldn't penetrate the darkness enough to find the walls or ceiling, but scattered across the floor were more remnants of previous expeditions. This time, however, the equipment was older. Much older. Kim knelt beside what appeared to be British military gear from the early 1900s. Dog tags identified a Lieutenant Colonel James Whitmore of the Royal Engineers, dated 1919. But it was the condition of the equipment that made my blood run cold. The metal showed no signs of rust or decay, as if it had been placed there yesterday. "This is impossible," Kim muttered, examining a perfectly preserved leather journal. "This stuff should have crumbled to dust decades ago." Travis was scanning the darkness with his thermal scope when he suddenly froze. "Contact," he whispered. "Multiple signatures moving in the perimeter. But the readings, they're not human." "Define not human," I ordered, raising my weapon. "The thermal patterns are all wrong. Too cold to be alive, but they're moving with purpose. And there are dozens of them." That's when we heard the voices. At first, they were just whispers, echoing from the darkness around us. But as we stood there, frozen with terror, the whispers became clearer. They were speaking in different languages, English, Russian, Arabic. But the words chilled us to the bone. "It wakes. The Ancient One stirs. Run while you still can." Chase dropped his rifle, his hands shaking uncontrollably. Those voices, they sound like warnings. The blue light ahead of us pulsed brighter, and suddenly the chamber was illuminated by an otherworldly glow. What we saw defied every law of physics and reason. The chamber wasn't a natural cave, it was a temple. Massive columns stretched up into darkness, carved from the same black stone as the steps. But these weren't decorations. They were structural supports for something enormous, and covering every surface were those hieroglyphs. Thousands upon thousands of symbols that hurt to look at directly. But it was the far end of the chamber that made us all stop breathing. There, partially embedded in the wall, was a door. But calling it a door was like calling the ocean a puddle. It was easily 50 feet tall and 30 feet wide, made from some kind of metal that reflected no light, yet somehow glowed with its own inner radiance. The hieroglyphs around it were different, older, more complex, and they moved constantly, shifting and changing like living text. And the door was cracked open. Not recently, but long ago, with jagged metal edges suggesting it had been torn apart from the inside. A gap of absolute darkness was visible, and from that gap came the breathing sound, amplified now to a volume that made our bones vibrate. "We need to get out of here," Mick said, his demolitions training telling him to recognize an unstable situation. "Whatever broke out of there, we don't want to meet it." But as we turned to retreat, we discovered our first problem. The staircase we'd descended was gone. In its place was solid stone wall, as if it had never existed. Will frantically worked his radio, but all he could raise was static punctuated by those same whispered warnings. "Negative on communications," he reported. "We're completely cut off." That's when we found the journals. They were scattered across stone platforms throughout the chamber, written in different hands and languages, but all telling variations of the same horrifying story. The first one I picked up was written in English, dated 1919. Lieutenant Colonel James Whitmore, Royal Engineers Day 1, arrived at coordinates provided by local informants, investigating reports of strange phenomena affecting British supply lines. Team of 8 men, all experienced mountaineers. Day 4, found the entrance. Local guides refused to proceed, speaking of the sleeper beneath the mountain. Dismissed as superstition. We were wrong. Day 8, reached the temple chamber. The door was already damaged, but sealed with what appeared to be iron bars. Found evidence of much older expeditions, Roman artifacts, medieval weapons. How many have found this place? Day 12. The breathing started 3 days ago. Constant, rhythmic, like something massive in deep slumber. Williams swears the door shifted during his watch. I'm beginning to think the locals' warnings weren't superstition. Day 15. Lost Henderson and Morris. They were on watch when we heard screaming. Found their equipment, but no bodies. Only blood, and scratch marks on the stone that suggest something with multiple limbs. Day 18. The door moved again. Whatever was sealed behind it is trying to get out. We've tried everything. Explosives, tools, brute force. The stone won't yield. We're trapped down here with something that shouldn't exist. Final entry. It's free. God help us all. It's free. The thing behind the door, it's not of this world. Multiple arms, each ending in claws like rusted blades. Hundreds of eyes covering its torso. All watching, all intelligent. It doesn't kill quickly. It plays with its prey. If anyone finds this, don't come down here. Seal the entrance, and never speak of this place. The second journal was in Russian, dated 1943. The handwriting increasingly erratic. Soviet Geological Survey. Classified Comrade Lieutenant Dmitry Volkov commanding Day 1. Following up on German intelligence reports of unusual mineral deposits. Team of 6 specialists sent to investigate possible strategic resources. Day 6. Found evidence of British expedition from previous war. Equipment in impossible state of preservation. Comrade Petrov notes atmospheric anomalies affecting normal decay processes. Day 9. Reached the chamber. The door has been torn open from inside. Claw marks in metal suggest incredible strength. Found British remains. What was left of them? Scattered throughout chamber like discarded toys. Day 13. It hunts us. The creature from behind the door stalks through these chambers like a spider in its web. We've seen it twice now. Massive, grotesque, moving on too many limbs. Its eyes, hundreds of them, tracking our every movement. Day 16. Only Mikhail and I remain. The others were taken one by one. We can hear them sometimes, screaming in the darkness. It doesn't kill cleanly. It studies us first, watches us with those countless eyes, learning our fears. Day 19. Mikhail broke. Ran screaming into the darkness rather than face another night of being hunted. I understand his choice. The creature enjoys fear. It feeds on terror before it feeds on flesh. Final entry. I can hear it coming. The sound of its claws on stone. The wet breathing from too many mouths. If you find this journal, know that we died serving the motherland. Seal this place. Let nothing escape. The third journal was more recent, written in shaky English with what looked like burned wood. CIA Operation Black Site Agent Michael Harrison, 1987. Mission: investigate Soviet activity in region. Satellite imagery showed unusual heat signatures. Team of 4 operators sent to assess threat level. Day 3. Found the cave entrance exactly where intelligence indicated. Previous expeditions' equipment scattered throughout upper chambers. British from WWI era. Soviets from WO2. Whatever they found down here, none of them left. Day 7. The temple chamber is a charnel house. Bones from multiple expeditions spanning decades, all showing similar trauma patterns, multiple puncture wounds, evidence of prolonged torture. Something down here enjoys killing slowly. Day 10. We've seen it. The creature that killed all the others. It's hunting us now, just like it hunted them. Massive thing. Walks on 8 legs like some nightmare spider. Arms ending in bone claws, dozens of eyes watching from its torso. Intelligence behind those eyes, cruel and patient. Day 12. Lost Rodriguez and Kim today. The thing doesn't just kill, it plays. Tracks us through these chambers, letting us know it's there, building our terror before it strikes. We found Rodriguez hanging from the ceiling, drained of blood. Kim was worse. Day 14. Thompson tried to fight it with explosives, brought down half the chamber roof. The creature just laughed, a sound like grinding stone. It's not from our world. Bullets don't stop it. Explosives barely slow it down. Final entry. I'm the last one. It's been toying with me for days now, appearing at the edge of my flashlight beam, letting me see it before vanishing into the darkness. When you read this, I'll probably be dead. Don't send more teams. Nuke this place from orbit if you have to, but don't let it escape. Kim grabbed my arm, his medic training making him check my pulse as he spoke. Paul, your heart rate is elevated, pupils dilated. Everyone's showing signs of acute stress response. But look at these bones. The injury patterns are consistent across all 3 expeditions. Multiple puncture wounds, evidence of systematic dismemberment. He was right. The remains scattered throughout the chamber all showed the same horrific trauma. Whatever had killed these men hadn't done it quickly or cleanly. It had taken its time, studying them, learning from them. Stay focused, I ordered, but my own voice sounded distant to my ears. We find another way out. There has to be. That's when Chase screamed. He was staring at the torn doorway, his face a mask of absolute terror. There's something moving in there, he whispered. Oh God, it's coming out. I followed his gaze and saw movement in the darkness beyond the door. Something vast was stirring, unfolding itself from whatever lair it had made in the depths beyond. The breathing sound intensified, becoming a wet, rasping noise that spoke of too many lungs working in unnatural coordination. And then we saw it. The creature that emerged from behind the door was a nightmare made flesh. It stood nearly 15 feet tall, its body a writhing mass of muscle and sinew. 8 legs supported its bulk, each ending in claws that scraped against the stone floor. Multiple arms protruded from its torso, some ending in grasping hands with too many fingers, others terminating in bone spikes that dripped with something dark and viscous. But it was the eyes that made me understand why so many expeditions had failed. Hundreds of them covered its torso and head, each one intelligent, each one focused on us with predatory interest. They tracked our movements with disturbing coordination, studying us like a scientist examining insects. "Open fire!" I shouted. But even as we emptied our magazines into the creature, I knew it was useless. The bullets struck home, black ichor spraying from the wounds, but the thing barely flinched. If anything, our attack seemed to amuse it. The creature tilted its massive head, and I swear I could see intelligence in those countless eyes. Not just animal cunning, but something far more disturbing. It was evaluating us, categorizing our capabilities, deciding how best to play with us before the inevitable end. "Run!" I ordered, but there was nowhere to go. The chamber was a dead end, and the creature now blocked the only apparent exit. Trevis was still firing when one of the creature's arms lashed out faster than the eye could follow. The sound it made when it struck him was like a wet branch breaking. He flew across the chamber and hit the wall with a sickening crunch. His thermal scope shattered beyond repair. The creature didn't pursue. Instead, it settled back on its haunches and watched us with those hundreds of eyes, waiting to see what we would do next. This was a game to it, a form of entertainment that it had been playing for decades with every expedition that had stumbled into its domain. "It's toying with us," Mick said, his demolitions expertise letting him recognize tactical superiority when he saw it. Just like it did with all the others. Will was frantically working his equipment when he made a discovery that chilled us all. "Paul, I'm picking up something on the emergency frequency. It's the voices from those journals. They're still down here somewhere." The realization hit us like a physical blow. The whispered warnings we'd been hearing weren't echoes or recordings. They were the voices of the previous expeditions, somehow still alive in this nightmare realm, trying to warn others away from the fate that awaited them. The creature was watching us process this information, and I could swear it was enjoying our growing despair. It knew we understood now that death wasn't the worst thing that could happen in this place. There were fates far worse than death, and it had had decades to perfect them. Kim was checking on Travis when he made another horrifying discovery. "He's alive," he called out. "Unconscious but alive." "But Paul, look at this." Where Travis had struck the wall, his blood wasn't pooling normally. Instead, it was being absorbed by the stone itself, as if the very chamber was feeding on it. The creature let out a sound that might have been laughter, a wet, grinding noise that echoed through the chamber like breaking bones. It was clear that our fear and suffering were exactly what it wanted, what it had been craving during its long imprisonment. "We're not going to fight our way out of this," I said quietly, looking at my remaining team. "But we're soldiers. We don't give up, and we don't leave anyone behind." The creature seemed to understand our defiance, and its countless eyes gleamed with anticipation. It had played this game before, many times, with many different groups of explorers and soldiers. It knew how it would end. But as it began to advance on us, something unexpected happened. The chamber began to shake, and dust rained down from the ceiling above. Somewhere in the distance, we could hear the sound of rock falling, of passages collapsing. Mick looked at me with grim understanding. "The explosions from the previous expeditions," he said. "They've been weakening the structure for decades. This whole place is unstable." The creature paused, its heads turning toward the sounds of structural failure. For the first time since it had emerged, something other than predatory amusement showed in its many eyes. And in that moment of distraction, I realized we might have found our only chance at survival, though it would require a sacrifice that would haunt the survivors forever. The sound of falling rock echoed through the chamber like thunder, and I saw our one chance. "Mick!" I shouted over the noise. "How much C4 do you have left?" He patted his demolitions pack, his eyes calculating. "Enough to bring down half this mountain. But Paul, we'll be buried with it." The creature's attention snapped back to us, its hundreds of eyes focusing with renewed interest. It had heard our exchange, and something resembling concern flickered across its grotesque features. For all its otherworldly horror, it was still a physical being, and physical beings could be hurt by tons of falling stone. "Will," I ordered, "try to raise base. Tell them our position and what we found. If we don't make it out, someone needs to know." "Paul, the interference is still—" "Try anyway." The creature began advancing again, but more cautiously now. Its 8 legs moved in perfect coordination, claws scraping against stone as it closed the distance between us. Those bone spikes dripped with anticipation, and I could hear a wet clicking sound coming from somewhere in its torso. Too many mouths preparing to feed. Kim was still working on Travis when our marksman suddenly groaned back to consciousness. "What? Where am I?" he mumbled, then focused on the approaching nightmare. "Jesus Christ." "Stay down," Kim ordered, but Travis was already reaching for his sidearm with shaking hands. The creature paused about 20 feet away, its massive head tilting as it studied us. I'd seen predators before, wolves, big cats, even human killers. But this was different. There was an intelligence behind those eyes that was both ancient and utterly alien. It wasn't just hunting us, it was savoring every moment of our terror. "It's playing with us," Chase whispered, his young voice cracking, just like the journal said. The thing seemed to understand his words, because several of its arms gestured in what could only be described as a mocking salute. Then it opened what I realized was its mouth, a vertical slit that ran down the center of its torso, lined with rows of needle-sharp teeth. And it spoke, not in words but in voices, the voices of every expedition member it had killed over the decades. British accents from 1919, Russian phrases from 1943, American screams from 1987. It was mimicking the death cries of its victims, using their final moments as a form of psychological warfare. "Thompson, please, help me," came a voice I recognized from the CIA journal. Agent Harrison's final moments played back in perfect, horrible clarity. Chase vomited, the sound echoing through the chamber. The creature's mouths curved upward in what might have been a smile. That's when Mick made his decision. "Paul," he said quietly, pulling out a block of C4. "I can collapse the ceiling right above it. Bury the thing under a few thousand tons of rock. But someone has to get close enough to place the charge. That's suicide, Will protested, finally getting a weak signal on his radio. Base, this is Recon Team Alpha. We are trapped in underground structure, grid reference. His voice faded into static. The creature's attention shifted to Will's radio, and several of its eyes narrowed with what looked like curiosity. It took a step closer, and I realized it was drawn to the electronic signals, the same way it had been drawn to every expedition that had brought modern equipment into its domain. It's attracted to the technology, I said. That's how it found all the previous teams. Travis struggled to sit up, blood trickling from a head wound. Paul, my thermal scope. When it hit me, I saw something. There's a passage behind the creature, hidden in the shadows. If we can distract it. The creature was close enough now that I could smell it. A mixture of old blood, decay, and something else. Something that reminded me of deep ocean trenches and primordial swamps. Its breathing was a wet, rhythmic sound that seemed to come from multiple sources within its body. One of its arms reached out toward us, not to attack but to touch. The gesture was almost gentle, like a scientist examining a particularly interesting specimen. When Kim reflexively stepped back, the creature's countless eyes seemed to register disappointment. It wants to study us, Kim said, his medical training helping him read the thing's body language. All those previous expeditions, it didn't just kill them for food, it was learning about us. The revelation was somehow more terrifying than simple predation. This thing had been using human expeditions as a way to understand our species, our behaviors, our fears. We weren't just prey, we were research subjects. Well, here's something to study, Mick growled, pulling the pin on a fragmentation grenade. Learn this, you freak! He hurled the grenade directly at the creature's torso. The explosion echoed through the chamber like cannon fire, filling the air with smoke and debris. For a moment, I thought we might have actually heard it. Then the smoke cleared. The creature was still there, but now it was angry. Black ichor dripped from several wounds across its body, and its eyes had taken on a red gleam that spoke of barely controlled rage. It let out a sound that was part roar, part screech, and completely inhuman. "Run!" I shouted. We scattered in different directions, but there was nowhere to go. The chamber was large but finite, and the creature was faster than anything that size had a right to be. Its 8 legs carried it across the stone floor in bounding leaps that ate up distance with terrifying efficiency. Chase was the closest to the hidden passage Travis had spotted. He made it about 10 feet before one of the creature's arms swept him off his feet and sent him tumbling across the chamber. He hit a stone pillar and stayed down, blood pooling beneath his head. "Chase!" Kim started toward him, but another arm blocked his path. The creature was hurting us, keeping us grouped together like livestock. That's when I noticed something. The creature's wounds from Mick's grenade weren't healing, but they weren't bleeding much either. The black ichor was thick, almost gelatinous, and it was already beginning to congeal. Whatever this thing was, it had remarkable regenerative capabilities. "Will, any luck with that radio?" I called out while dodging another sweeping arm. "Negative. The interference is too strong. But Paul, I'm picking up something else. Movement in the passages above us. Multiple contacts." My blood ran cold. If there were more of these things, but then I heard something that made my heart leap with desperate hope. The distant sound of helicopter rotors. "Search and rescue," Will breathed. "They must have tracked our GPS before we lost signal." The creature heard it too. Its massive head turned toward the ceiling, and for the first time since it had emerged, I saw something that might have been fear in its countless eyes. It knew what helicopters meant. Fire from above, heavy weapons, possibly even airstrikes. "Mick!" I shouted. "The ceiling! Now!" He nodded grimly and began setting charges on the support pillars. The creature, suddenly understanding the threat, abandoned its careful stalking and lunged directly at him. Travis, despite his injuries, managed to get off 3 shots with his sidearm. They struck the creature center mass, doing little damage but drawing its attention. Those hundreds of eyes swiveled toward him, and several arms redirected their attack. "Travis, get down!" Kim shouted. But it was too late. The creature's bone spikes pierced Travis through the chest, lifting him off the ground like a rag doll. But instead of killing him quickly, it held him there, letting us watch as his blood dripped onto the stone floor. The chamber itself seemed to drink it in, the stones glowing faintly with absorbed life force. "You bastard!" Mick roared, abandoning his careful placement of charges to rush the creature with a live block of C4 in his hands. "Let him go!" The creature regarded Mick's charge with what looked like amusement. Another arm swept out, but Mick was ready for it. He rolled under the strike and came up right next to the thing's torso. The C4 pressed against what might have been its heart. "See you in hell," he growled, and triggered the detonator. The explosion in the confined space was deafening. The shockwave knocked us all flat, and chunks of stone rained down from the ceiling. When the dust cleared, both Mick and the creature were gone. Not dead, just gone, as if the blast had atomized them both. But the creature's regenerative abilities were beyond anything we'd imagined. Even as we watched in horror, pieces of its shattered form began to writhe and move across the chamber floor, slowly pulling themselves back together like some nightmare jigsaw puzzle. "It's not dead," Will said, his voice hollow with despair. "How do you kill something like that?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Chase, semi-conscious and bleeding, was pointing weakly at the chamber walls. The hieroglyphs, he mumbled. "They're changing." He was right. The symbols that covered every surface were shifting, rearranging themselves into new patterns. And as they changed, I began to understand what they were saying. They weren't instructions for awakening the creature. They were warnings about how to stop it. The ancient people who had built this place hadn't been worshipping the thing. They'd been its prisoners, just like us. And they'd left instructions for future victims who might be smart enough and brave enough to use them. "Kim!" I shouted. "The blood on the walls, it's not just feeding the chamber. It's part of a containment system. The creature needs to feed regularly, or it goes dormant again." Kim looked at the slowly regenerating mass of flesh and understood immediately. "We need to deny it sustenance, stop the feeding cycle." But how do you starve something that had been feeding on human blood for over a century? The answer was in the hieroglyphs, and it was horrible in its simplicity. The containment system required a massive blood sacrifice, enough to flood the chamber and trigger whatever mechanism the ancients had built into the stone itself. "Paul," Will said quietly, holding up his radio. "I've got contact with the helicopter. They're asking for our status." I looked at what remained of my team. Travis was dying, impaled on the creature's spikes but somehow still breathing. Mick was gone, vaporized in an explosion that had only temporarily delayed our enemy. Chase was unconscious and possibly brain damaged from his impact with the pillar. Kim and Will were looking to me for orders, for some miracle solution that would get us all out alive. The creature was almost fully regenerated now, its form more solid and defined with each passing moment. Those hundreds of eyes were beginning to focus again, and I could see intelligence returning to its gaze. Soon, it would resume hunting us, and this time it wouldn't be playing games. The helicopter rotors were getting closer, but they were still too far away to matter. Even if a full rescue team rappelled down into the chamber, they'd just be more food for the creature, unless we could trigger the containment system first. "Will," I said, making the hardest decision of my military career. "Tell the helicopter to stay back. Tell them to wait for our signal, then come in with everything they've got." He nodded, understanding what I wasn't saying. "Paul, there has to be another way." "There isn't," I said simply. "But maybe we can make sure this thing never hurts anyone else." The creature was almost fully reformed now, its massive bulk rising from the scattered pieces like some hellish phoenix. But it was vulnerable during the regeneration process, slower and less coordinated than usual. I picked up Mick's remaining C4, enough explosive to bring down the entire chamber if properly placed. The hieroglyphs showed me exactly where, at the base of the pillars that supported not just the ceiling, but the entire containment system. "Kim, get Chase and Travis to that passage Travis spotted. Will, give me 30 seconds, then call in that airstrike on our position." "Paul, no!" Kim protested. "We can find another way." "There is no other way," I said, looking at my team one last time. "And even if there was, I'm not leaving Mick's body in this place. We came down here together, and by God, we're finishing this together." The creature was fully regenerated now, standing at its full 15-foot height and regarding me with obvious interest. It seemed to sense that something had changed, that the dynamic between predator and prey had shifted somehow. I walked toward it, the C4 in my hands, and those hundreds of eyes tracked my movement with predatory focus. When I was close enough to smell its rotting breath, close enough to see the individual teeth in its vertical mouth, I spoke directly to it. "This is for every expedition you murdered, you son of a bitch." I triggered the detonator. The explosion that followed wasn't just the C4. It was the entire containment system activating at once. The chamber filled with blinding light as mechanisms built by ancient hands finally completed their purpose. The creature's scream was cut short as the walls themselves came alive, stone flowing like water to entomb it once again. When the rescue team finally rappelled down into the chamber 3 days later, they found Kim, Will, and Chase trapped in a collapsed side passage, alive but traumatized beyond measure. They found Travis barely clinging to life, somehow having survived wounds that should have killed him instantly. And they found me, standing in the center of a chamber that looked like it had been frozen in the moment of a massive explosion, my hands still gripping the detonator that had saved them all. The official report listed it as a cave-in caused by unstable geology. The creature was never mentioned, and the true nature of what we'd found beneath those mountains was classified at levels so high that even I don't have clearance to read it. But sometimes, late at night, I can still hear that wet breathing sound. And I know that somewhere deep beneath the mountains of Afghanistan, something ancient and hungry is dreaming of the day it will wake up again. The containment held, but containment systems can fail. And when they do, God help whoever finds that cave next. Because the creature we fought was just sleeping, not dead. And it has a very long memory for those who heard it. I'm telling you this story now because the seismic readings from that region have been showing unusual activity lately. The kind of activity that suggests something very large is moving around down there. The war in Afghanistan is over, but the real battle beneath those mountains might just be beginning again.
Still got 2 more of these ologs to knock down, fortunately. Maybe I should have gone into voice acting.